access to really creative, high quality graphics that are inspired by our continent to really help implement these great concepts from the New View, but also ideas around safety culture, really just how we communicate with people better. And everything's all inspired by design thinking. But a lot of this happened when Matthew and I went to Canada to research our idea. We thought, is this idea that we have to build a safety platform, one that we've noticed in our own country in South Africa, one for our own continent, or is this something that we could really use across the globe? So we spent some time in Canada just really researching different demographics and different ways and approaches to health and safety. And this is where we essentially came across this concept of the New View. So I'm not going to give away any of the juicy details on the theories. I'll leave that to Matt. But yeah, so Matt is my business partner as well as my husband. So we're actually a safety couple, which a lot of people find sometimes quite funny, but sometimes quite cool. So yeah, welcome to a Sunday night in our house. We are in different rooms. So if you hear the dogs barking in my room and then also on his, just so you know, it is the same house. So I think that's all from me. Thank you very much for this wonderful turnout. And we really look forward to having this conversation with you all. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Lindy. Yes, as Lindy introduced me, my name is Matthew Gonzalez. Let me just share my screen and then we will get going. If you just give me one moment. Can we just confirm that everyone can see my screen?
Yes, yeah, we can see it, Matt.
Yeah, we can.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So yes, as the introduction said, today we're talking about the new view of safety and why Africa must join the conversation. Some of you may have come across the new view or under a different name. I'm really just going to talk about it. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of safety management, how that came about, and why we needed to look at safety as a profession slightly differently, why we needed to talk differently about safety and how that all came about. And as well, we're going to look a little bit into the future, what comes next? What do we need to do tomorrow when we get to work and to think about safety just a little bit differently. Just a little bit about me. That's me. I started my career as a chemical engineer, studied here in South Africa. I met Lindy and we co-founded the Health and Safety Dialogue Company. And we've been busy for the last couple of years building the Amber platform, which, as Lindy explained, really is about giving tools to health and safety practitioners and professionals on the ground to really communicate effectively and to share some knowledge about the new view with them. My role in the company is Head of Research Development. I'm also the Safety Differently Book Club Ambassador for Johannesburg. Just to make things quite clear as we move along in the presentation, we've got a key, so you can follow on what is being talked about when. Everything in the gray is what we talk about orthodox safety, so stuff we've done in the past. Everything in the yellow is the new view of safety from a general perspective. Human and organization performance in blue, just culture in pink, and then resilience engineering as well as safety 1 and safety 2 in the green. So moving on to the history of health and safety management. I mean, we've always been concerned with the safety of our people since the dawn of time, but it's really since the Industrial Revolution that the scale of harm that could be caused grew, and we really got concerned about managing that safety. The Industrial Revolution changed the way we thought about safety. And it started what we call the first age of safety thinking, and that's the age of technology. And this began around the 19th century, like I said, with the Industrial Revolution, and it lasted all the way up until about World War II. During this time, there were a few prominent contributors to health and safety industry, and I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. First on the list is Frederick Taylor, and he wrote this book called The Principles of Scientific Management. And it became an absolute classic instantly in management literature as a whole. And it really demonstrated how the breakdown of tasks and activities could serve as the basis for improving work. And that's really what he was focused on, not actually safety, but looking at work in general. He stated that there are 4 new duties for management that they need to take on. The first of that being that each task can be deconstructed to its base elements and then improved for maximum efficiency. That we need to match workers to jobs based on their skills, experience, and abilities. We need to monitor performance and ensure compliance to those best ways to do things. And then also that managers must plan and train the work while workers perform the work. And this is one of the first times that we see this diverging of managers and workers. They used to be quite mixed and together. And from the early 1900s, it started to split away from each other. Now, while Taylor's work was not directly related to health and safety, its success influenced how we improved and how we understood how adverse events happened in the safety space. Our improvement was achieved by carefully planning and providing detailed instructions and training. And this obviously led to safety procedures aimed to reduce the variability in human performance. Adverse events were also deconstructed into the little components that made them up, and we searched for which component failed and try to fix that. These two together really increased the belief in how effective procedures were and the emphasis on procedure compliance. The next contributor was Herbert Heinrich. I'm sure many of you have heard of him, or at least been seen his work. He wrote his book, The Industrial Accident Prevention, A Scientific Approach. This book saw 5 editions starting in the 1930s all the way to the 1980s. So it's quite a prolific work, and it really cannot be understated how much influence Heinrich had on safety management. He was really the first pioneer, the first safety management person out there. He's done a lot of work. I'm really going to focus on only 3 of his biggest accomplishments. And the first was the domino causation model. He dedicated a lot of his work to causation and action sequence. And his domino model was a very simple and linear model looking at how injuries came about. You can see on the right-hand side of the diagram, we have the injury, and that was obviously caused by the accident. That was then caused by an unsafe act, whether that be a mechanical or physical hazard, which is caused by some sort of fault of person, he said. And that could be someone's accident proneness or just being stupid or whatever. There was a lot of different things that people considered. Obviously, these things aren't considered accurate or scientific nowadays. And lastly, what he said is this fault of person was really caused by the social environment. And this could include ancestry. And I think we can all agree that blaming someone's ancestry or race on the fact that they had an accident is absolutely ludicrous. But it was something that was prominent in the time. And we can't really, keep on with thinking that way. The model is also very simple and very linear, and it really just does not represent what actually happens on the ground in reality. We are much more complex in the real world. Herbert Heinrich's triangle is probably his most iconic metaphor that he left us with. It states that for every major injury or death, there are 29 minor injuries, 300 no accident injuries, and an unknown amount of unsafe practices or unsafe conditions. Now, there are many issues with the triangle, even though it's preached a lot today. Firstly, there is no such thing as a universal ratio. Each sector, each company, even each activity might have different ratios. If you look at something like the rail industry, who experience a lot more catastrophic injuries than minor injuries, they actually have quite an inverted triangle or inverted shape, and it doesn't even look anything like a triangle. Another big problem is it's often said that or thought that we need to focus our attention on the no injury accidents, the small stuff, to prevent the major ones. And this can only work if the causal pathways of the accident were similar and very well known and very understood. And this is often not the case. Things that hurt you aren't necessarily the things that kill you in your organizations. It's also said sometimes that it can predict when a major injury is going to happen. So, we've had 300 no injuries, we have 29 minor, we're going to have a big one soon. And that's just, there's no scientific basis. There's really no data to hold that up. The last metaphor that Heinrich gave us was talking about the role of workers in causing accidents. And he stated that the direct and proximate causes of industrial accidents were 88% was the unsafe act of persons, 10% were unsafe mechanical physical conditions, and 2% were just unpreventable. These numbers, or those similar numbers to these, have been discussed as absolute fact in many places and still on many places, many websites today. While a lot of people are still promoting this. There's a lot of people on the other side saying that these should actively be refuted. It's actually damaging to the health and safety profession at large. Some of the problems with this ratio is that a large part of the data that Heinrich collected was self-selected from closed case insurance claims. So there was no real investigation on his part. And often people had something to gain by selecting that it was either a person or a machine that was the cause of the accident. They would get the payout from the insurance if that was the case. Another part of the research was based on plant owners' records, so people right at the top, and often they were biased against their workers below them. Heinrich also only allowed the option of persons or machine. He didn't allow any other options to be considered, so didn't think, he was quite narrow in his thinking. And he only looked at the thing that was right before the accident, never looked at anything before, what influenced the worker or anything like that. Around the same time in the 1930s that Heinrich released his book, the discipline of behavioralism in psychology was coming quite dominant, specifically in the management science space. And behavioralism is what they call a stimulus response model. It's really only concerned about the observable stimulus, so when something happens, and then the response. It's not really concerned about what happens in the mind or what goes on in the head, the feelings, everything like that. Together with the work of Heinrich and Taylor, this really formed the basis of what became known as behavior-based safety. Behavioralism was really defined as having 4 steps. The first is to define the correct behavior, then train people on how to do that behavior, measure whether people were complying, and then reward and punish. Reward if they complied, punish them if they did not. And again, there is a couple of issues using behavioralism within the safety space, or in large, defining the correct behavior for a instances can be quite difficult, especially if the environment is complex, if it's changing constantly, which a lot of our workplaces are. What the correct behavior might be today is not necessarily the correct behavior tomorrow. So that can be quite challenging. There's been a lot of studies on looking at reward and punishment within the health and safety space, and it can lead to a lot of underreporting and a lot of hiding of incidents or playing with the numbers, so they can get the rewards, if they're under a certain threshold. Jumping ahead to the 1940s, we see that the field of human factors or ergonomics really started to come. And this grew out of engineering psychologists just after World War II. They looked at the tools and technology and working environments as more malleable than fixed. So they looked at it really to shape the environment rather than trying to shape the person, like Taylor was looking at. Its main goal is to design in order to optimize human well-being and overall system performance. And like I said previously, with Taylor and Heinrich, there was a focus that the human's behavior must be shaped to fit the environment, whereas human factors and ergonomics looked at it from the other way and said, we need to actually shape the environment so that humans can work in it effectively. And this age of technology, the focus of technology, trying to improve safety, looking at technology, really lasted for quite a while, up until about the 1970s. There was this large accident called the 3 Mile Island accident that really blew this age of technology away. And we realized we needed to move past that. And this started what was called the age of the human factor. And this is where we started looking at errors and try to classify them and explain and why it happened. This 3 Mile Island accident, before it, little attention was paid to the role of the human inside these systems. But after it, and because of it, a lot of focus got put on human reliability within the safety system. The operators played quite an integral role in the progression of the accident as well as its outcome. And this accident, drew a lot of international attention and a lot of political attention. So it really changed up our thinking. The age of human factor really didn't last long. It lasted less than 10 years. And from there, we moved into the age of safety management. And it was brought about, by a couple of major accidents in the 1980s. The first was the Space Shuttle Challenger, then Chernobyl, as well as Piper Alpha. Again, these accidents drew a lot of attention worldwide, a lot of attention to the industry as a whole, and we needed to see, okay, well, what do we need to do? These accidents really changed the focus from the individual person within the safety system to the organization itself. And we see from these accidents, we have one of the first measurements of safety culture. After Chernobyl happened, the International Nuclear Safety and Advisory Group was formed with the express task to investigate what caused the disaster. They wrote a whole range of reports, I think it was 15 in total, but their fourth report was dedicated entirely to the concept of safety culture, trying to define it, try to tell us how to deal with it, try to do what to do with it, all of it. They define their safety culture as that assembly of characteristics and attitudes in organizations and individuals, which establishes that as an overriding priority, nuclear plant safety issues receive the attention warranted by their significance. Now, many people were not satisfied with this definition and did a lot more work to defining safety culture, safety climate. A lot of work has come from, this concept. Many definitions up to, I think there was a paper I read the other day, putting about 25 different definitions over the last 20 years. So they didn't think that this definition was good enough. We needed to say, okay, well, it tells us sort of what safety culture is, but it doesn't tell us how to achieve that goal. In the 1990s, one of the most significant work within the safety culture space was from James Reason. He stated that safety culture was actually made up of 5 subcultures. So that those 5 subcultures were a reporting culture. So people were prepared to report errors and near misses. A just culture. People were encouraged to provide safety sensitive information, but there was a clear line between what was acceptable and what was not. A flexible culture. This is the ability to shift and to flatten the organizational structure, to defer to those who had the expertise during crises. A learning culture, and this is a culture that is really willing to draw the right conclusions and is willing to implement major reforms if they needed to. Now, those 4 together would come together and create an informed culture. And this is a culture where those who manage the systems have all the relevant and current knowledge of all the factors that determine safety of the system. And that is what James Reason said that was a proper safety culture. So just to recap from a global perspective, how the history came about, we started off really in the 1910s with Frederick Taylor, looking to constrain variability, Herbert Heinrich and behavioralism, looking to explain a bit more, human factors and ergonomics, looking to shape our environments to make sure that we are working the most effectively, moving into the age of the human factor, where we've looked at a lot of error, and then the age of safety management, where we actually looked at the greater organization around. From there, I'm going to jump into the new view of safety. The new view of safety, it's a bit of a misnomer. It's been around for a little while now, but it's really an umbrella term that has a lot of schools of thought underneath it, and they all share certain fundamental characteristics that are different from orthodox safety. Some of you may be familiar with the concepts. I'm pretty sure you will have heard at least one. I'm hoping at least one. If not, I'm hoping that you can learn a little bit more today. So what are people saying about the new view? There's a lot of differing opinions. Some people call it a movement. Some people call it a cult. Some people say it's a godsend that it helped the organization so much. Some people think it's absolute rubbish. And a lot of people think it's a way forward. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. Is it really the way forward for you? My opinion and my definition of what the new view is really that it's a shift in the ideas, the beliefs, and the fundamentals that underpin health and safety management. Because something is new, I'm just going to contrast to something being old. We're going to call that orthodox safety. That was all what I've been talking about in the history. And the characteristics of the safety is really defined by these 5 things. The first being that human error is the main cause of accidents. And we saw that in Herbert Heinrich's work, that when systems are designed and constructed, they are inherently safe. And that inherent safety within our systems is disrupted and degraded by the unpredictability and unreliability of the human behavior. Safety is created, maintained, and improved by reducing the influence of the human. And safety is defined by the absence of injuries, incidents, and accidents. And this is quite common. A lot of people would have come across, that definition in their careers. The new view, however, looks at it slightly different. They don't believe that safety is the absence of something. They believe safety is actually defined as the presence of positive capacities and resilience. Therefore means that safety is actually the condition where the number of successful outcomes are as high as possible. We look at what goes right and try to replicate that. Workers then are seen as problem solvers and their solution to harness. They have the expertise, they have the knowledge that you need to tap into to really understand what's going on in your system. Safety is not only a bureaucratic accountability upwards, but it's also an ethical responsibility downwards. It's not only about showing good numbers, it's actually about helping people be safe. In the new view of safety, human error is also not seen as a valid causal category. You can't have at the end of an investigation saying that the cause of the accident was actually human error. One of the fundamental concepts for the new view is the contrast between work as imagined and work as done. Now, work as imagined can be defined as the idealistic view of work, how it should be done. And this is given all various assumptions about the working conditions. It's quite in an ideal world, and it's usually documented in all our rules and our procedures and our checklists, etc. Work as done, on the other hand, is how it actually unfolds, how the work unfolds in reality, is what really happens. The new view tends to focus on work as done rather than the work as imagined. We say that when a system performs reliably, it's actually because of the adaptability of humans rather than a perfectly thought out plan or design. Now, there's always going to be the difference between what the work is imagined and work is done. And it's quite easy to say, well, there is this difference. Why don't we just make work is done more like work is imagined? And the problem with that is that work is done exists for a reason. People do the work the way they do it for a reason. And sometimes the work is imagined, the procedure doesn't actually reflect what needs to happen in reality. So people need to get the job done and have to sometimes make workarounds. So then we can say, well, let's try it the other way around. Why don't we just make work as imagined exactly like work is done? And that's also challenging because work is done is always changing. Our environments are always changing. So it can be quite difficult to grasp on any single day, what that work is done is looking like. And then as soon as you sort of understand it fully, it's changed again. So you're always lagging behind a lot. What we aim to actually do is to not make one like the other, but rather try to realign both. To look at our work imagined and say, okay, well, what is happening as our work is done? What is really happening on the ground? And then let's try and, rework our work as imagined, our procedures, our policies, so that this facilitates that. Then reevaluate our work as done to go back to our work as imagined and just keep on going around in this cycle, checking in with reality as it happens on the ground, and then making sure our procedures and policies are reflecting that reality. I'm going to jump into the next school of thought, the first one we're going to be talking about today, and that's called Human and Organizational Performance, or HOP for short. And again, it's one of these school of thought that sits under this umbrella of new view. Human and organizational performance is really focused on learning and creating learning organizations. It's based on five principles, and I'll just talk you through the first 5 principles. The first principle is that error is normal. Error will always exist within your systems. People will always make mistakes. Therefore, good systems should not try to aim for total error reduction, but rather become error tolerant, be able to absorb the error. And this enables workers to fail safely, recover, but still complete the objective. We must remember that error is not a choice. So it should not ever be seen as the cause of a failure because it's not something we can control very well. The second principle is that blame fixes nothing. Blame is not seen as useful in the new view, especially in HOP. It is emotionally satisfying for us as humans, but is not operationally important. The organization doesn't get any better if we blame someone. It tends to misdirect resources, and those resources can be used more effectively to actually improve the system. Blame also makes us try to fix the worker rather than trying to fix the system in which that worker is operating. And this should be avoided as much as possible. The third principle is that learning and improvement are vital. I don't think anyone's going to have any argument with this, but it's very important to notice that learning is a deliberate, strategic, and operational choice to improvement. It doesn't just happen. We have to go out and do it. Organizations should always be learning. Learning organizations will always outperform organizations that aren't learning, whether that's production, profit, safety standards. Everything, every metric across the board, a learning organization will always be better at. The new view sees our workers as the experts of the operations. They're the ones that do it every single day. who understand all the nuances, all the small things that, management might not be able to see. Therefore, learning from them and with them is pivotal. Learning should always be made easy, because often what we learn is going to be quite messy and difficult and things that we don't want to hear. So we need to make the process of learning as quick and easy as possible. The fourth principle is that context drives behavior. This concept is based on local rationality, which states that people do what makes sense to them given their goals, their understanding of the situation, and the focus of decision at the time of making that decision. So in order to understand why a decision was made, we need to first understand the decision maker's local rationality. What were their goals? What was their understanding? What was their focus at the time? It's very easy to look back and say, well, they should have done this, they should have done that, but really putting yourself into their shoes at that time to understand what was going on. This principle also, says that events are system outputs. So if you want a better behavior, you actually need to first make a better system. The fifth and final principle is that how you respond to failure matters. When an event happens, you have two choices. You can either blame and punish, or you can learn and improve. You cannot do both. That feedback from workers is essential to having an effective safety management system. Without that, you're missing a huge thing, and it just fails. And you as a health and safety practitioner responding badly, or as a manager responding badly to failure, really compromises that ability of your organization to learn from that event. So again, you can either blame and punish, or you can learn and improve. It's your choice which one you want to do, but you can't do both. I'm going to move on to some resilience engineering. This started a little bit before the new view. And this really, resilience engineering really looked at why organizations can perform well and don't fail, whether that be from a production point of view or a safety point of view. The new view draws heavily on the resilience engineering. It really tries to understand why things go right and then try to enhance our capacities to do that every single day and every single time. It's based on 4 cornerstones. The first of them being the ability to respond to the actual, so knowing what to do. The ability to flexibly monitor the critical, and that's knowing what to look for in your organization. The ability to anticipate the potential, knowing what to expect. The ability to learn from the actual, and that's knowing what has happened. Resilience system is one that can adjust its functioning prior to, during, or following an event, whether that event be a change, a disturbance, an opportunity sometimes, so that it can sustain required operations under both expected and unexpected circumstances. And that's what they're really aiming for. How do we make sure that our organizations are flexible and resilient enough that no matter what happens, we still get good success coming out of it on the other side? So drawing from his work in resilience engineering, Professor Eric Hollnagel started focusing those principles on safety. And this led to the development of Safety 1 and Safety 2. In his words, Safety 1 is called protective safety. It is safety here is defined as few things as possible going wrong. So we can represent that in our diagram as the least amount of red in our cup, okay, the bad things. Here we need to minimize that amount of red in our cups. We use words like prevent and eliminate and constrain. We see that safety, quality, and production are all actually quite different in this view, and therefore require different measures and methods to control. Safety 2, on the other hand, is seen as more productive safety. All right. And here we need to maximize the amount of green. This is the good stuff, the successes within our organization, inside our beaker. Safety is defined as many things as possible going right. Here we use words like support or augment or facilitate. Safety, quality, and production, therefore, actually all become inseparable and therefore need matching measures and methods to deal with them. It must be noted that a lot of people talk about Safety 1 versus Safety 2, and that was never the case and never what Prof. Hollnagel actually wanted to be. It's always Safety 1 and Safety 2. These two need to be used together to actually be effective. He also focused on looking at trying to learn from success, and he put the case through like this. He said that imagine that if you have something that has a failure rate of 1 in 10,000, right? We look at that one failure, we say that we've had an adverse outcome, therefore we have an absence of safety, right? This one outcome is easy to see because it's usually quite big. but it's quite difficult to manage and quite difficult to change. It also has very low predictive value because they happen so infrequently. But if you look at the other side of it, and we look at the 9,999 successful events that we had, we can say that in those times, we had the intended outcomes. We had the presence of safety in organizations. These are quite difficult to see, but not actually, because we do know how to look at them. We just don't. They're also much easier to change and manage because they have high predictive value. It's the things that happen every day, 10,000 times a day in your organizations. And that's where the power of it lies, is that learning to learn from failure, which is what safety professionals are taught quite thoroughly, and applying those same techniques into learning for what makes our organization work, and then trying to replicate that. Moving on to some work, we talked about it a little bit earlier in James Reason work, looking at the safety culture. I'm just going to focus on one of those cornerstones called Just Culture. Sidney Dekker has done a lot of work on this. A lot of people, are really familiar with his work. And he really defines a just culture as a culture of trust and learning and accountability. He looks at two different processes to achieve a just culture. The first is called retributive justice, and retributive justice is based on three questions. So it really asks which rule was broken, who was responsible, and then how bad the violation was, so what should the consequences be. Restorative justice, on the other hand, asks three quite different questions. It asks who has been hurt or who has been potentially hurt, what do they need to heal, and therefore whose obligation is to meet that need. And these are quite different approaches. Again, it must be noted that it's not one or the other. These two can be used together, but it must be used with purpose. You must know which one you're using. The big main difference between the two is that retributive justice is quite backward looking and really asks who is responsible, where restorative justice is forward looking and asks what is responsible. So that really characterizes the new view. And we've spoken a bit about what it is. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what it isn't. It isn't only about looking at successes and positives. Some criticisms have been leveled against it, saying that that's exactly it, that it's just very optimistic, and that's not how reality is. But we don't preach that. We say that we need to learn both from both sides of the coin, both from our failures and both from our successes. It's not a fad, and it's not just a theory. It's not something that's going to go away. It's something that's been talked about more and more in the safety industry. People looking to hire safety professionals are asking, do you know these concepts more and more? And it's not just a theory. As the research happens, we're starting to get really practical tools to use these concepts in your everyday. And it isn't just about safety. Changing your perception about the worker and how we engage with the worker really opens up this to much more. It opens it up to quality, to production, to mental health, to many things above and beyond health and safety. So what about the African voice in this? Like I've just said, these new view concepts are growing in support around the world. But has it really penetrated into Africa? And I don't think it has as much as it has in other places in the world. We know that investment in Africa is growing every year. We know that we're going to be creating more and more factories, more and more mines, more and more, places of risk. And I think we need to be a lot more proactive then and see what works for us. Anyone who's lived in Africa for any amount of time, I've lived here my whole life. That some things that can be developed, in Europe or in the US or Australia, and that don't work the same in Africa. We are a different continent. We see the world differently. We need to adapt these concepts to really represent our view of the world. And I think this change needs to start sooner than later. Like, earlier was said, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. So that's really the same concept that I'm talking about here. Can the new view work in Africa? I think that's the first thing we need to answer. Obviously, I'm not an expert in every region in Africa. My business is mostly in South Africa. So this is actually a question you're going to have to answer yourself. Really have a look at what the concepts are. Can you apply them into your organizations? I'm going to look at three quite broad trends in Africa and see how they interact with the new view. I'm sure you'll be, you'll know all three of them, and we'll just have a bit of a chat with them. The first, obviously, is ISO 45001, or I'm sure we all know, we did speak about it a little bit earlier. For those who don't know about the standard, it is the first international occupational health and safety management system standard. It consists of 10 clauses. The first 3 really tell you how the standard works. The 4 to 10 are really what the standard is. The 4th is the context of the organization. This looks at all the internal and external issues that impact the ability of the occupational health and management system to work, and it considers all the needs and expectations of workers and other interested parties. Right in the center of that is the leadership and worker participation and consultation. We move up through the PDCA cycle of planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and then improvement. There is quite a large agreement between the new view and ISO 45001 standard. Both understand that at the center of all of this is this participation and consultation of workers and leadership to really understand what's happening on the ground within the organization. We can't just adapt someone else's management system and just put it in our organization. It won't work. So we need to find our own feet. Both also understand that the organization sits in a greater context, and that safety performance and business performance need to be aligned for good safety and good performance to both happen. Both also understand that improvement doesn't just happen. It's something that needs to be done. It's something that we need to go out and learn about what's happening in organizations, and really make that improvement every day. Moving on to one of the other trends in Africa is the zero accident vision. It's called by a couple of different names in South Africa, and most of Africa it's called zero harm. The new view and zero harm are at odds with each other. The new view really is defined as the ambition and commitment to create and ensure safe work, and that all accidents are preventable. The new view doesn't like that second part, just that all accidents are preventable. There's been quite a lot of work done and research looking at, why this is, and is it good, is it bad? Sheraton Data in 2017 released a set of research, and they identified this possibility of a zero paradox, what they called, and they found that one is marginally more likely to have a major accident working in a large UK construction site operated by a company that has adopted the zero accident vision versus one that has not. So there is a lot more research that needs to go in. Svetlana, in reply to this research, said that it was actually an example of implementation failure and regard the zero accident vision not as a target, but as a process driven by commitment. Sheraton Data again replied to that and said, well, if all accidents are preventable, then why can't we use this goal of zero? So it's still a contentious point. It was specifically in the new view. Is it useful? They don't believe so. The new view really sees that we can achieve safe operations without talking about zero, that it becomes a unattainable goal. It creates distrust within organizations. It forces people to really start fiddling with numbers and hiding things. Obviously, this is not always the case, but that's really the criticisms leveled at the zero accident vision. Behavior-based safety, again, very common across Africa. New view and behavior-based safety, again, are quite at odds with each other. So just to contrast the two here, I've made a little bit of a table. And behavior-based safety, they really talk about being unsafe acts being the primary cause of accidents. Again, we saw this in Heinrich's work as well. It really stems from there. You can look at many behavior-based safety people's websites, and they will say they often have a 90% or an 80% of accidents are caused by unsafe acts. The new view doesn't see human error as a valid causal category. It believes that that's the start of the investigation. That's not the end. There is something further back within the system that we can control, that we should be looking at. They can create vicious cycles within organizations. Management can see workarounds and then institute more controls. The workers then see these controls as really just a hindrance to them getting their work done, which causes them to make more workarounds, which causes management to do more controls, et cetera, et cetera. And this just really breaks down trust between workers and management. It stops the free flow of information when this happens. And as I said earlier, that free flow of information is really pivotal to making a good and robust health and safety management system. It also could have what Hopkins called the fallacy of monocausality. And this is where health and safety practitioners only believe that the only cause is unsafe acts. And this, lets them, makes them have quite a narrow view of the world. And it discounts everything else that could be contributing to these accidents, and they never focus on those things. So it's quite easy to fall into that trap. Behavior-based safety also believes that consequences are the most important factor in determining behavior. They say the consequence must be, quite immediate after the behavior and quite severe or strong after the behavior to really reinforce. The new view says it's the other way around. The antecedent or the context in which a decision or behavior is made is actually much more powerful in determining behavior. And because of this, behavior-based safety sees behavior as an input to the system. So they say we need better behaviors that create better systems. So their focus is on the better behaviors. New view says, again, that's the other way around, is that behavior is actually an output from the system. So that better systems create better behaviors. So our focus should be on the better systems. Can the two be used simultaneously? Some people from the behavior-based safety side say yes. Although those from the new view say no, that the differences are too fundamental and too great to really be overcome. In Africa, we have a couple of other problems with the new view of safety. Sometimes things are just quite difficult to source. I ordered a book. I emailed the author directly. It took almost 9 months for me to get the book. Living in South Africa, we're on right at the end of the world. So sometimes it's really difficult to actually get physical copies of these things, which just leaves us unexposed to all these new information, these new trends. Luckily, however, the digital is available in some cases, so we can actually try and overcome that that way. A lot of the concepts are not as spoken about or widely found at conferences. So we're not, presenting that to people on the ground. And often the people who are speaking about are mostly international speakers. And that can be quite difficult to get them in and out of places, quite expensive to do. And again, they don't offer an African view of things. All is not lost, though. There is a lot of work and interest being gained of these new view concepts, that just culture specifically, and the work of Sidney Dekker broadly has been spoken about a lot in Africa. It's found in a lot of regulators' websites and talked about in a lot of different training materials of how to deal with and create that just culture within an organization. There's quite a lot of increase in interest across Africa. We see that in IOSH specifically, and obviously they've just quite recently opened the West Africa branch for our Nigerian listeners. Sheikh Management here in South Africa have published a couple of articles talking about, the new view of safety. The Southern African Institute of Mining Metallurgy Young Professional Council, again, published this work that was published. The work that this talk was based on, they published. That was quite nice. And obviously, talking conversations like this, that gets the word out, gets people interested, gets people talking about it, gets people analyzing it. There are also quite a handful of keynotes around the continent. I know Prof. Eric Holnagel comes to Africa quite regularly. He works most specifically in the healthcare space. So, that's really where he's there. So where to go to next, where to learn more about it, about the new view of safety and what it all entails. I've really just given you a brief overview of it all. SafetyDifferently.com, run by an absolute fantastic gentleman named Jeff Lith. He's always happy to help, always happy to direct. There's a lot of articles there to really get you thinking about the new view of safety, a lot of guidance. Like I said earlier, some of the books are quite difficult to get. But there is also audiobooks and ebooks. You can get a lot of them in the digital format. And there's plenty of podcasts and YouTube channels. You just got to know where to look. Ton Coughlin, who works a lot in the human and organizational space, organizational performance space, has his pre-accident investigation. So pre-accident investigations podcast. And he is prolific, lots of podcasts there, really interesting stuff, lots of interesting conversations, a lot of different authors to really get quite a broad view of this new view of safety. if you want to look for a bit more practical implementation, obviously we being supporters of the new view of safety, we take all of these concepts and put it into our platform Amber, which you can find at ambersafety.info. Like I said, my job is the research and development. We take all these concepts and really transform them into safety campaigns, providing toolbox talks and workshops that really can be implemented on the ground. And in looking at these things from an African context, representing African people and adapting the concepts to the African context and African space when need be. Obviously, we still need more research and more discourse, from the African perspective. What does it look like in South Africa, in Nigeria, in, Kenya, wherever it may be. And this can really only happen if it becomes a business goal and if our leaders get on board and really want to push and really know about it. Our biggest need, however, is actually you. It's the health and safety practitioners on the ground, building this community, getting involved with each other, talking, having more, talks like this, and looking at how we can learn from each other and get better in the OSH space, not even just the new view, but the OSH space in general. I just want to finish off with a quote from Prof. Sidney Dekker, and he says, underneath every seemingly obvious story of error, there is a second deeper story, a story about the system in which people work. And I think that quote really summarizes exactly what the new view is all about. So I will hand back and open up for any questions. I'm sure there are quite a few, and hopefully I can answer as best as I can. If you want to get in contact with me, there's all my details. Connect with me on LinkedIn. You can scan the QR code or find me. Feel free to email me or WhatsApp me. I'll, very happy to have a chat with everyone.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. That was a real, I don't know which other word to use, but that was wonderful. That was really eye-opening. And I'm really interested in this kind of discussion. Actually, I never knew it was going to turn out like this. I am one of those people who listen to foreign experts in health and safety. And when you mention safety differently, what came to my mind was Sidney Dekker. And thank God you also mentioned him, talked about Sidney Dekker, and that will actually lead to my question. Please, if you have your questions, kindly raise up your hands and let's just have you. I will ask my own first question, then we'll give the platform for others to ask. So my question is, aside from Sidney Dekker, I've also heard about different approach to safety. Sidney Dekker focuses on safety differently when you give a platform for workers to actually express how best the work can be done safely. I think that's the overview I understand about safety differently by Sidney Dekker. And there is this other safety expert, Larry Wilson. I don't know if you've heard about Larry Wilson, that talks about Safe Start, which focuses on human factors as the major cause of accidents. So when you now look at the approach of Sidney Dekker and the one that you just spoke about now, I want you to, I don't know if you've followed Larry Wilson and the Safe Start approach that focused on, so the major 4 factors: frustration, absent-mindedness, mind not on task. It's like 4 actually that they focus on in order to reduce human errors, which is what they think is the major cause of accidents. So now my question is there an integration between the two, or there are differences based on what you see from Sidney Dekker? Yeah, complacency. What is based on Sidney Dekker and Larry Wilson approach to having a good safety culture?
I think there's quite a lot of different approaches to having a good safety culture, and I think the best way to look at it is trying to take what's best for you. Again, trying to do exactly what Sidney Dekker does might not work exactly in your organization, and I think he himself acknowledges that. There are a lot of good information. Human error is a it does happen. It's something that you do need to address. So I don't think there's ever a conflict between, looking at those two different approaches. It's really about what we do with those approaches. How do we treat our workers? It's the difference between talking at someone and talking with someone. One is just explaining to them, the other is having a deep conversation. And Sidney Dekker is really talking about having that deep conversation, talking to people and saying, well, we need to understand why this human error goes wrong, and to say, okay, well, this error has happened, and we can say that this, may have contributed to that error. But then what do we do about it? Do we just say, well, stop making errors? Or do we say, well, actually, we need to change the system to be able to absorb those errors? And that's, again, Sidney Dekker, his Safety Differently does sit under this new view. And I think a lot of people, a lot of different techniques or a lot of different approaches fit with this new view, even if they're not exactly designed that way. The SafeStart methodology that you've explained, I haven't looked at it in depth, but I see no problem as to why it wouldn't be able to work together. Nothing in it excludes, because even though you might say, okay, they believe that, human error is the cause of the accidents, there still might be some very, very good techniques and things that we can use within the greater new view of safety concepts and methodologies. I hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you very much. That was a very wonderful answer. So we have some comments here. Yes, Mr. Akim Mukhtar, talking about the safe start here as complacency and the like. So thank you so much, sir. Good presentation. Engineer Khalid Adwola, a renowned safety expert in Nigeria, also made a good comment. He said, fantastic presentation and easy approach to the delivery. Thank you. Thank you, Engineer Khalid. You are really recognized. So we have some person raising up his hand. Please kindly unmute yourself, UG Umorin. Kindly unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Goncalves. I'm particular about this new view, and I happen to work in an organization, possibly the biggest smart card manufacturing company in West Africa, and the issue of safety to me has been a concern since I came on board. And I've been trying to talk to the head of operation who is paying attention in implementing safety. My question is, how do you leapfrog bringing in the new view of safety, where the safety culture is not properly recognized, and then transition immediately from a zero or less safety culture to a new view culture? You're moving from almost 0.0 to 0.2, skipping 0.1. How do you do that? Bringing in, is there an easy approach? Leapfrogging the general safety culture, general toolbox meetings, which are not in practice, safety drills, which are not in practice, and jumping into this new view, or bringing in a safety culture. Does it accommodate the regular safety operation and the regular safety procedures and guidelines? How do you tend to do this?
Okay. Unfortunately, I don't think there's ever an easy answer, especially when we're talking about safety culture. Cultures exist for a reason. I think that's the first thing we must understand, that they serve a specific narrative within the organization, and they can't be changed overnight. It's a slow and steady change that you have to do. To answer just one part of your question, that, Jeff Lyth always said that, when we're talking about organization trying to bring in safety differently, or safety to the new view of safety into the organization, you never want to remove a piece of armor that you're not ready to remove. So we never want to tell you to remove something that you're doing now that is working for you until you're confident that what we're replacing with will work. So you must, again, it's going to be a long process to change that. And the first thing you need to do, especially with the culture, is to get those leadership on board. You need to actually sit down and say to them, you speak to them, have a conversation with them, and to show them that importance of why safety has to be done. from a financial aspect, from an ethical aspect, all of these different things, and get them on board, because if they're not driving it, it can very quickly fall away. If you're sitting in the middle and you're the only one speaking up and saying, we need to do this, we need to do this, it gets very difficult in your job. So you need to have support from both sides, both at the top of management and at the bottom. And that's a very difficult thing to do. I wish I could say, follow these 5 steps and there we go, it happens. But it's really just long conversations and speaking to workers and speaking to people and understanding what their needs are. And that's really the added thing that needs to be done from a New View perspective, is really just having the conversations quite informally. It doesn't have to be a formal thing. There are techniques to make those conversations a bit more formal and try to understand, what's happening in your organization. But yeah, you have to get leadership on board, and that is difficult. You can leapfrog a little bit to bring in safety to things, concepts into your business, but you're still going to need those safety one. You're still going to need the proper procedures. You're still going to need the proper drills, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things still need to be there. This is never going to replace that. It just adds to that. It makes them better. And I think that's the focus of it.
All right, thank you very much. So that was a wonderful response to the question. And in addition to that, we can also say, regardless the situation, regardless the state or the level where an organization is when it comes to the level of safety practice, you can actually move to the New View. No, it's not necessary that you have to go through the old view because you go to the new view. It's just a new approach. It's just a new concept. So and this new view is actually easier and more practical, and it helps you to achieve your goals faster than going through the old concept that will take a longer period of time for you to achieve. So it's not about starting from a base through the old view and to the new view. The old base is existing and the new view is existing. So it's from starting from scratch and choosing to approach it with the new view. And with that, you'll be able to achieve your goals. Thank you very much, sir. So also we have Mr. Oh God, I don't want to consume your name. So please kindly unmute yourself. Injita Botan Memo. Okay, kindly unmute yourself, please.
Good evening, sir. Quite a wonderful presentation. I've learned so much. So straight to my question, I want to ask, I'm on the blame and punish, the point where we discussed about blame and punish. Now, generally in Africa, like in my context in Cameroon, where I've been practicing for a while, one of the things is when workers, I came to notice that when workers, they are in a system or in a culture where when you do something wrong, you either have to be blamed and then you have to be punished. It brings some kind of tension. They complain of like, okay, it makes the workplace tense, which can instead lead to accidents. It can instead favor accidents to occur because somebody is working under tension. Some of them complain of, okay, when you're working and you know that you are being observed in the work that you're doing, it brings some kind of tension. So how do you manage in with such kind of a situation in the New View? Thank you.
Yes, I agree 100%. It does bring that tension. It drives the fear around that. No one likes to be, someone staring at you while you're trying to do your work. And it does actually cause quite a few accidents in itself. From the New View, I think, especially when events happen, I think one of the easiest thing to do is to actually bring that person in and the people around them into the investigation. Hear their story. Often when we look at events, it's the safety officer looking at everything. I'm just going, tick this, he did this, and looking for someone to blame, from the mindset, from the outset. To switch that around and say, okay, well, what in the system caused this to happen from your brain? What in the system caused this? That's what I'm looking for. Prof. Hollnagel often talks about what you look for is what you find. If you, walk into a room and you're looking for someone with glasses, you'll immediately find someone with glasses, but you might not notice that if you weren't looking. So when you're doing your investigations, if you're looking for someone to blame, you'll find someone to blame. If you're looking for something, some process, some work schedule, something else to blame, something else to explain this, then you tend to find those. And those you can change. It's tough to change people because, again, if you look at people's local rationality, what they do makes sense to them. And you would expect that people who are similarly trained or similar education, grow up similarly, have a similar, social culture, they're going to make the similar decisions. So if a decision makes something, if something makes sense to someone one time, it probably makes sense to one of his workers next to him. So just shouting at that person or just punishing that one person often doesn't help the organization. What we need to do is take a step back and say, well, what in the organization is facilitating that? And then try to address that. Again, one of the best things I've ever heard was from a gentleman named Clive Lloyd, and he always says that trust is the currency of leadership. And as health and safety practitioners, you are leaders. You lead the safety space. You need to have trust with your workers. The more you blame and punish them, the more likely they're not going to tell you things. The more likely they're going to hide things because you're creating that culture of fear. And then you don't know what's actually happening on the ground. So to get past that, you need to just really open up, make yourself vulnerable, and let them come into your space. Let them, a lot of people see the health and safety guys as police. Show them what you're doing, show them why you're doing it, get their opinion, let them tell their story. Because often the people who experience accidents, the people who are around them, they don't get to tell their story. They don't get to say, this is what happened from my perspective. So getting them in starts building that culture of trust. Then they start saying, okay, well, this guy's actually on our side. And then they start to, get over that fear and say, okay, well, he's observing me. He's not observing me to, get me fired. He's observing me to try and keep me safe. And it's a change of perception. And again, it's a slow process. It's about opening up yourself and having, setting aside time to speak to people on their level, having fun with them, not just talking at them, including them in your toolbox talks, in your workshops, etc. I hope that answers your question there.
Yes, thank you so much, sir. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you for the question.
Right. Thank you. And in addition to that, there is even when we are developing your job as an analysis, for example, for your work activities, there's a space where you need to actually look at how your workers are doing the job. So like Mr. Matthew said, it's all about having that deep conversation with them to let them understand that what you are doing is not to witch on them or to look at what they are doing wrong, but you are trying to look at what they are doing in order to advise them on ways to do it better to prevent accidents. So when you give them that approach and that mindset, it makes them to have that self-confidence that what you are doing is not to punish them, but to see how better or how best you can develop a working system that others can work with. Respect their experience, respect their diversity, respect what they do, their technicality, and give them a way, approach them positively with good communication skills, and it will be a better way for you to actually help your organization at large. So thank you very much for that question. So
yeah, just to add on that, sorry, when you do those investigations, when you speak, just always remember that your focus must be on learning, and get that across to people, because when they realize that your focus is on learning, not on punishment, then they say, well, okay, I'm going to try and help this guy to make them learn, and you said it earlier, if you make it clear that all you're trying to do is make their lives better, make their jobs better, then people start opening up. It's a difficult conversation to have sometimes. Some people are, a little bit distrustful. And again, it's one conversation at a time, and eventually you'll find that people start opening up.
All right. So, Mr. Emmanuel Abayomi, please kindly unmute yourself, sir.
Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Emmanuel Abayowa from World Safety Organization, Nigeria. Thank you so much, Matthew, for an eye-opening presentation. If I get the whole concept behind the presentation well, it's about people having employees imbibing the safety culture themselves rather than being enforced to embark on safety. Now, this is the challenge I have with the new view. Now, for instance, here in Nigeria, the basic safety people are used to is the HSCMS, the safety management system. So, you have your job hazard analysis, you have your risk assessment, you have your policies, you have your gap analysis, and the rest of them. Now, the challenge is we're trying to make companies from experience. We are still working on how companies can embrace this HSE management system thoroughly to imbibe it into their company structures. And we still view this now as an old system. Now, can there be a merger? I'm looking at the leapfrog thing, how that can actually work, especially with our Nigerian system here. It's going to be extremely difficult. Is there a way where we can have a merger, Matthew, where in the normal HSEMS structure that is in the old system, we can now impute this new view system into it? I don't know, can there be a merger instead of the leapfrog?
I think absolutely. Absolutely. I think if we, obviously I'm not an expert on the Nigerian, systems, the Nigerian structures, but if it's anything similar to the ISO 45001, like you said, you have your policies, you have your hazard identification, all of these things that are all there as well. The new view really just say, if you want to inject the new view into that, it's not about removing any of that. It's about how you come up with it. So let's look at hazard identification. How do you identify your hazards? Do you speak to your people to ask them what hazards they identify? When you're doing your policies, do you sit down with them and say, you tell me what you do in your job? If you were doing this, what are the 10 steps or 15 steps or 20 steps that you are doing? What happens when we have, a lot of productions, one of the machines is down, and you need to double production on the one machine, otherwise we're not going to meet our quota. What happens then? Do you skip a step? And why that step? Why not this other step? So what is important to your workers? And having those conversations with them from a new view perspective about building trust, about learning about the work as done rather than just the work as imagined, that gives you that feedback that I was talking about. Learning that work is done, putting it back into your work as imagined, and going around like that. So you don't have to remove anything from your management system. It's just about how you formulate it, how you look at performance evaluation. Are things going right? Are things going wrong? How you treat that investigation, how you look at improvement, all of these different aspects that are contained within the system, just done slightly different, but never removed. So absolutely, they should be merged. Like I said, with the especially ISO 45001, which is a management system standard, there is a lot of crossover between the two. They're trying to achieve the same things in the same way. It's just about, like I said, it's just about a perception shift from the people, managing the management system.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm just looking at how do you make the leadership of companies adopt the new system? We've already introduced an old system to them. Now we don't even have most of them embracing it. So now you're bringing a new concept. How can we make it attractive for them to be able to imbibe into their companies?
I think firstly, I would say that from the management system point of view, there is no old system or new system. It's just a different way of doing the old system. So again, you're not removing anything, you're just doing stuff slightly different. A lot of what we're talking about doesn't cost anything. And that's always nice to management. When you tell them you're actually not going to pay any more, I just need a little bit of time to speak to people, and we're going to make sure that, these things are done better. And what you can do if they're not entirely convinced, you can always say, okay, well, let me do a micro experiment. Give me a little part that I can experiment with the new view, and then track that performance. Let's look at their productivity. Let's look at their safety metrics over time. Great. And if they are performing better, then you can say, well, look, here's the proof in our organization. Let's take it out to the rest of the organization.
Great. So it's actually good if you could suggest to them to have a section first where you work with as an experiment for them to see the results so that they can embrace every other thing.
Yeah,
Thank you
exactly. So
much.
that's been done in quite a few places around the world, and has worked very well for a lot of good companies. It also gives you the ability to push past what you've got today. You know, you've got your system, and even if everything has worked and your management is fully behind it, there's how do you get better and how do you get better? And it's all about experimenting, sometimes in very small steps, you know, so you don't, you know, have catastrophic failure. You don't have people getting injured. It's more about just small steps. So you do those small experiments and, you know, prove in your organization, not just, you know, someone in Nigeria or someone in South Africa did it, it works. You know, it's to say, look, here is the evidence in your own books.
Exactly. A step-by-step approach. Thank you so much, Matthew.
Pleasure.
Yes, thank you thank you very much, sir, Mr. Emmanuel Abayomi. What I also see about this new view, like what Mr. Matthew Conliffe said, there is no really a particular new view that is different from what is in ISO 45001, for example, because it's just that most organizations are focused on an old approach, and we are trying to bring out that new concept that is already embedded. So talking about, from your question, talking about how do we give the approach from workers, from the employees themselves, letting us see how they do the things and how we can work around the best ways in which there will be a good approach. If you look at the ISO 45001 in clause 5, it talks about leadership and workers' participation. And I think that answers it all. So when you're talking about leadership, you're talking about the management. And you're talking about worker participation is about bringing the workers also into the system and seeing a way we can work around how the management brings a good approach and how we can incorporate workers' participation based on the realities on ground, because they're actually the ones doing the work, and they will understand better a safer way to do that same particular job. For example, like we said, if you want to draft a job without analysis, you can't sit in your office and draft a job without analysis. You have to go to the site and watch the workers, observe them as they do their work, and communicate to them while you are doing that. So that particular approach is already embedded. That new view per se is already embedded in ISO 45001. It's just that we are now bringing it out and letting us see that this thing is a new view, but it's already in ISO 45001. But it's just that we turn a blind eye to it, and we are now bringing it up and creating the system from this particular view and calling it a new view, a new approach, so that we will not only spend our time on that old way, but look at another new way of doing it, which is already, like we said, inside the ISO system, if we are trying to use the ISO system, for example. And I think that clause 5 that talks about leadership and worker participation actually address that. So
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. And
I was just agreeing with you.
Thank you very much, sir. So Mr. Dare Alfred said, please, what are the derivative of this new view from ISO 45001? I think it's similar to what I just said now. What are the overlaps or application?
Yeah, I think you put it right on the head. And obviously, this was very much just an introduction. You know, each one of the new view concepts that I spoke about is much more in depth. So I can't cover it all, unfortunately, in 2 hours. It's just not enough. But if you look at anything from clause 5 specifically, I think is the big one, is really looking at that worker and leadership participation and consultation, really getting that worker's view on things. Understanding why they're doing the things they're doing, why they're working around, why they're not following some procedures. How come the procedure actually hard to follow? Is it stopping the work? Is it badly written? All of these things come up when you do those investigations, and ISO 45001 says the exact same thing. Like I said, in almost every single clause, there is overlap, the support, the performance evaluation, as well as improvement. It's all pretty much the same. They are talking about the same thing. Just the new view is really looking into how to achieve that, how to do that application. So just talking about, there's a way to do sort of accident investigation called a learning team. And that what you do is you actually get people who design the work, so maybe managers, line managers, safety professionals, as well as people who do the work themselves, and you get them in a room and actually have a very structured conversation about learning about how the work is done. And then following on, over a day or two or a couple of hours, looking at how to improve the work. What defenses do we need to put in place? What do we need to take out? This is actually not working. This is working, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a lot of these applications that exist, that have been developed that are out there under this banner of New View. And it's really about facilitating that facilitating ISO 45001. ISO 45001, the standard doesn't tell you how to do anything really. It tells you that this should be done, but it doesn't really give you a step-by-step a way to do things. I mean, our product as well, Amber Safety, our platform as well does that. It's really about engaging workers. A lot of safety professionals, they know they need to speak to people. They know they need to do toolbox talks and workshops and gain that knowledge from their workers, but just don't really have the skills to do so. And that's what we are really trying to do, is trying to give those people those skills, trying to teach them those non-technical skills about communication and the different styles of communication, and take out the difficulty of designing, good looking posters. We do it, give it to you, and then you can just hang them up very nicely or edit them as you want. But really getting that conversation starting. So those tools exist, they're out there, and that's really where the overlap is ISO 45000 tells you what you want to achieve. New View starts looking into how to achieve that.
Wonderful. That is well articulated. So thank you all. Any other question? Any other question? If you have question, contributions, please let us have it. So the most common question here is if your slide will be made available. Will it be available for people?
I can send that through to you, and you can send that through to everyone.
Yes. As usual, the way we do it is we send it to a drive and we send the link to those who registered for the training. Then everyone will be able to download it. And we also send it directly to most of the groups we belong to. So thank you so much for your presence. Thank you all for staying from the beginning till the end. We appreciate your presence. We can see quite a number of persons with us. Mr. Oboro Umana, thank you. Mr. Emmanuel, Mr. John Dahiru Yakubu, Mr. David Ogene Pawon. Thank you all, Mr. Azubi K, for always your presence. Engineer Khalid, Mr. Onifade Olufmelayo, Mrs. Bola Joko Aina, Mrs. Abiola. For a follow-up on this particular approach, you can communicate with Mr. Matthew or Mrs. Lindy Scott. Details is already on the group. You can follow them on LinkedIn, follow them on Instagram. They're also on Instagram and also present on every social media platform. If you want to keep watching the video, if you want to watch this recorded version, want to send it across to other people, it's already available on our YouTube channel. So just go to Cordal video there, and you can share it to others for us to learn together. So we appreciate your presence. We appreciate you for making time with us. Thank you all for joining. Next week again, tomorrow is World Mental Health Day. World Mental Health Day. And the weekend that follows, that is this coming Sunday, we would see and try and make a discussion concerning mental well-being. And we'll be talking about that next week. So you can join us again next week on a new series, a new enlightenment section. Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Matthew Conglave. Thank you for your well-detailed presentation. It was well-detailed. It was well-articulated. Everyone enjoyed it. I learned a lot from the beginning of the class when you started talking about the origin, the basis of health and safety, where it all started from. And the funniest thing is that I've also read about the causation models, the ILCI model and the likes. And I'm happy that I'm seeing someone talking about it also, because it's like, am I the only one? Because I hardly hear people talking about all these old concepts, and I really love those models actually. Thank you for bringing it to our notice, for bringing it to our listening, for training us on it. Mrs. Lindy Scott, thank you so much for all you do about safety, for all you do with safety. We hope to see you physically one of these days. The AfriSafe Award is coming up next month, and we hope to see you possibly to join us on the AfriSafe Award. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. I can't keep mentioning names. I can see a lot of people, a lot of professionals here with us. Thank you, Dame Vincent, Mr. Oluseyi, Moses Udense, Mr. Bright. Thank you all, Mr. Abdullah, Mr. Charity, everyone, Mr. Richard, Engineer Khalid. Thank you. Okay, someone said I should mention her name. That is my wife. So, Mrs. Lindy, my wife too is also, I am a wife too. We are also safety professionals. So it's not only you and Mr. Matthew. I am a wife too. We are both safety professionals. So we are only two in Africa. We are only two.
Yay. We can have a double date.
No problem, is welcome. So our name is Adegoju Adamson, and she said that she mentioned her name also. Thank you so much, Mr. Daria, Fred. Thank you so much. See you all next week.
Yes. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Mr. Malongi, I can't do it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.